I'm not gonna sit here kissing my girlfriend.
She can't. Not so promising.
Scrutiny.
What if I told you that while everyone was busy mocking Janelle's farm dream, they completely missed the real story unfolding right in front of them? Because when you dig deeper into what's been happening with this family, you'll discover that the woman everyone loves to criticize might actually be the only one who had it figured out all along. Let's talk about this so-called farm situation that has everyone up in arms. People are absolutely livid about Janelle buying 40 acres of land, calling it a waste, questioning her decisions, demanding to know what she's actually doing with all that space. But here's what's fascinating about this reaction. When you take 40 acres and there's nothing on it, everyone assumes failure. Everyone's mad at Janelle for living her life. But no one's asking why they're so angry about a woman making choices about her own property. Maybe it's just a vegetable stand she's planning. Maybe it's an event space. Maybe it's just a patch of land where she wants to live in peace. Either way, what exactly is the problem here? The reality is, she's planning to build a house there. And it wouldn't be surprising if Maddie eventually did the same. The land was affordable. And it doesn't seem like the goal was ever to run some massive commercial operation with extensive crops and livestock. Even if the farming idea doesn't work out completely, she still ends up with a home on property she owns. Think about this for a moment. Plenty of people own large parcels of land simply to live on it. They're not running commercial farms. Some have dozens of acres and use it for nothing more than peace and quiet, privacy, and the freedom that comes with space. Honestly, when you look at Janelle's track record, this is a far more reasonable choice than other life decisions she's made in the past. It seems like she's finally building a life that actually makes her happy. She's surrounded by family and grandchildren, she has the land she's wanted, and she appears to be seeking a more grounded, nature-connected lifestyle. That alone deserves respect. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Developing something like a flower farm or any agricultural operation takes serious time. You can't plan an entire operation overnight. There's infrastructure to build. And housing comes first. Once that foundation is in place, the rest can follow naturally. Expecting fully developed farmland before the foundation is even poured isn't realistic by any stretch of the imagination. That said, it's fair to point out that the idea wasn't especially well thought out from the beginning. Janelle was never exactly a budding farmer, and the early excitement around the project set expectations she likely wasn't prepared to meet. The progress so far hasn't been particularly promising, and scrutiny becomes valid when public attention and potential profit are involved. At the same time, this situation reflects a broader pattern we've seen with this family. They historically have made impulsive decisions without strong long-term planning, often relying on outside income streams to stay financially afloat. Unfortunately, these habits seem to be getting passed down to the next generation. In the end, people are entitled to form opinions about all of it, the choices, the outcomes, and the direction things are headed. But remember this, building a meaningful life on your own terms, even if it's done imperfectly, is still a significant step forward. But here's where the story gets really interesting, and it's something most people have completely overlooked. While everyone's focused on criticizing Janelle's land purchase, they've missed a much bigger revelation about how this family actually fell apart. And it starts with understanding that Robyn didn't enter this family as a wife, she entered as a mistress. The family was already long established when Robyn arrived, years into its formation. She came in with romantic behavior well before any marriage took place. There was kissing, emotional entanglement, and what can only be described as full-blown betrayal of the existing family structure. She wasn't just a newcomer bringing fresh energy. She was a disruption that would ultimately tear everything apart. Her rival brought secrecy, manipulation, and financial burdens that weren't hers to place on others. Debts that had nothing to do with the established family were suddenly being paid off by everyone else. She contributed nothing tangible to the household, yet expected full support emotionally, financially, and domestically. But here's the most revealing part. It was a calculated move, and she played it extremely well. The relationship between Robyn and Cody didn't resemble traditional courtship in any way. It was an affair in both spirit and execution, built on deception. That happened not just behind closed doors, but publicly as well. When your foundation is built on that kind of betrayal, it doesn't just develop cracks over time. It completely crumbles. At the time Robyn entered the picture, Cody already had 3 wives and a fully formed family with children who were well into their teens. The spiritual requirements of their lifestyle had already been completely fulfilled. The addition of another wife felt less like a religious calling and more like a personal crisis, playing out in real time. Cody would later admit that the marriage wasn't spiritually driven at all. It was about physical attraction, plain and simple. And here's what's crucial to understand. Christine's reaction wasn't jealousy born of insecurity or competition, it was pure intuition. She recognized that something was fundamentally wrong with the situation. Her family was changing in ways she could feel before anyone could even articulate what was happening. Watching her struggle with that emotional unraveling was genuinely painful to witness. Robyn's expectations seemed incredibly naive at best. She likely imagined being welcomed with open arms, her children adored, her presence embraced by everyone. Cody's initial devotion probably reinforced that fantasy. But marriage didn't come with the constant attention she'd grown accustomed to. One day out of 4 wasn't enough for her, especially when that day had to be shared with the needs of other wives and, more importantly, with children who had long-established bonds with their father. She seemed completely unprepared for the reality that Cody was already deeply connected to his older children. His involvement in their lives, especially with those he shared interests with like wrestling, wasn't something she could control or redirect. And it made her feel genuinely threatened by kids who had been there long before she arrived. Despite her frequent appeals to modesty and morality, Robyn's own history completely contradicts the image she tried so hard to present. She had a child before marriage in her first relationship, then entered this established family through a relationship with a man who was already married, becoming emotionally involved and physically close in ways that were entirely inappropriate, given the circumstances. At one point, she shared intimate moments with Cody while his wife was literally in labor with his child. That single fact tells you everything you need to know about where her priorities and his truly were during that time. There was nothing pure or spiritual about any of it, only entitlement, ambition, and a trail of consequences that others would be forced to carry. Now here's something that will completely change how you see this entire situation. Everyone blames Christine for eventually leaving the family. But what if the only person actually fighting for the family unity was Janelle? Prior to the pandemic hitting, Janelle convened a meeting to address issues that others had been deliberately avoiding for months. She wanted to discuss why they had joined this principle in the first place and whether those original goals still mattered to anyone. From her perspective, it was obvious they didn't matter anymore. The shared vision that had once held them together was slipping away, and she wasn't about to sit back and pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. She approached each wife individually, trying to open real lines of communication and suggesting concrete ways to reconnect, family gatherings, meaningful conversations, actual effort from everyone involved. She wasn't being naive about the situation. She could clearly see what was coming down the road. The kids were growing up and leaving home, and once those parenting duties faded completely, what would actually be left of their family structure? Not much, from the look of things. By that time, the unraveling was already well underway. Mary and Cody had virtually no relationship left whatsoever. Christine was deeply unhappy and had been for years. Robyn was playing an entirely different game altogether, one focused on securing her position rather than building family unity. Right around this time, Robyn brought up the idea of having another baby. But it wasn't really about wanting another child, it was about making a very specific point. She was the only wife still physically able to expand the family, and she was subtly positioning herself as the only viable option for Cody to continue his legacy. The timing of the suggestion was incredibly convenient for her goals. Then the pandemic hit, and the differences between the households couldn't have been more obvious or telling. Robyn enforced strict isolation protocols with no wiggle room and no negotiations whatsoever. Christine went the opposite direction, making her own decisions entirely. Cody's absence from most households only made Christine's independent approach easier to maintain. Janelle, as usual, tried to be the bridge between everyone. She actively searched for solutions that would work for all parties involved. But underneath all her efforts, she was beginning to recognize a painful truth: the family was collapsing, and she might be the only one who actually cared enough to try preventing it. It's telling that it took months to even hold that crucial meeting Janelle had requested. Months of silence, avoidance, and clear disinterest in functioning as any kind of cohesive unit. The message being sent was loud and unmistakably clear. Janelle also stood alone in voicing serious concerns over Mary's legal divorce from Cody. She pointed out that this change could significantly alter the family's internal dynamics, something everyone else seemed determined to ignore completely. They all assumed Mary would continue acting in the family's best interest. Despite her changed legal status, however, Janelle wasn't confident that Robyn would do the same if their roles were ever reversed. That skepticism would turn out to be completely justified. Here's what makes this even more remarkable. Janelle was the only wife who actually believed in plural marriage as a principle. She didn't resent the lifestyle the way Mary and Christine clearly did. Robyn appeared far more interested in being the favored wife than in building any kind of genuine plural unity. Robyn enjoyed the structure and support the arrangement gave her personally, but not necessarily the principle behind it. Janelle wasn't born into this lifestyle like some of the others. She consciously chose it, committed herself to it, and worked at her relationships with the other wives even when it became uncomfortable or challenging. For years, that dedicated effort seemed to pay off in meaningful ways. But the move to Flagstaff marked a turning point where the structure no longer served her needs, and the relationship stopped being reciprocal. She genuinely valued the shared family life they had built, the interconnectedness between all the children and the support system among the original wives. But once the children grew up and those daily distractions faded away, the foundation showed its serious cracks. Without strong adult bonds holding everyone together, the underlying problems became impossible to ignore or work around. Janelle likely didn't want radical change initially. She also wasn't blind to reality. She understood they were drifting apart as a family unit, and she tried harder than anyone else to stop that process, not out of denial about their problems, but out of genuine hope that maybe something meaningful could still be salvaged from years of shared life. She made the effort when no one else would. She opened the door for honest communication and real solutions, but in the end, she was the only one still genuinely trying to make things work. And then we witnessed one of the most heartbreaking moments that perfectly illustrates the core issue behind Cody's fractured relationships with his children. During a tense conversation at their property, his son Gabe opens up with raw vulnerability, expressing a deep desire to reconnect and spend meaningful time with his father. He communicates clearly, grounds himself with breathing techniques, and articulates his needs in an emotionally mature and remarkably composed way for someone his age. Gabe hadn't seen his father in 8 months, and instead of acknowledging that devastating reality, Cody deflects entirely. Rather than recognize Gabe's obvious pain or take any responsibility for the distance, he immediately shifts blame onto Gabe's mother. He refuses to engage with the real issues standing right in front of him, his inability to respond with basic empathy or even minimal emotional awareness reveals a consistent pattern of avoidance and blame shifting that has damaged multiple relationships. The contrast between Gabe's emotional intelligence and Cody's dismissiveness is absolutely striking to witness. It becomes painfully evident that the strength and clarity Gabe demonstrates didn't come from his father's influence, it came from the environment his mother Janelle provided, despite all the challenges she was facing. This scene makes it crystal clear that the emotional disconnect isn't just unfortunate or accidental. It's the direct consequence of consistent neglect, arrogance, and a stubborn refusal to grow or change. This moment stands as a defining example of why the family's bonds have unraveled so completely, and why so many of the children have chosen distance over continuing dysfunction. But the manipulation and control go even deeper than most people realize. Here's something that will shock you about the Coyote Pass property situation. They didn't divide that land because it was fair or right. They did it for the cameras and the storyline. Janelle and Cody's major fight about the property happened back in December 2021. Then came the so-called heart-to-heart conversation between Mary, Cody, and Robyn at that picnic table in fall of 2022, and yet somehow, it took until March of 2025 for Cody and Robyn to finally retitle Coyote Pass in a way that was actually equitable. That kind of delay is absolutely ridiculous and inexcusable. It's hard to imagine they didn't resist the entire process every step of the way. For it to drag on that long, they must have fought tooth and nail to maintain control. It's not just frustrating, it's genuinely infuriating when you think about it. Yes, it's good that Mary and Janelle eventually ended up with something, especially considering they had paid into that land for years. But the fact that it took multiple years to reach that resolution feels fundamentally wrong on every level. There's a strong indication that this wasn't just about logistics or paperwork complications. The timing of the title change seems almost to deliberate when you examine it closely. The paperwork was actually prepared as early as September 2024, but no one signed anything for months after that. It's impossible not to see that delay as completely calculated. Everything points to a deliberate strategy designed to preserve tension and drama for as long as possible. Coyote Pass represented the last real connection between Cody and his original wives, and it seemed like that tie wasn't going to be severed without a prolonged struggle. It was less about property rights and more about maintaining power and control. Cody appeared determined to hang on to that leverage for as long as he possibly could. Then there's the financial aspect that raises even more questions. managing a $12,000 monthly mortgage, while simultaneously purchasing a $100,000 luxury vehicle, creates some serious inconsistencies. The numbers simply don't add up in any reasonable way, and it's difficult to believe. That kind of spending pattern doesn't warrant serious scrutiny from everyone involved ultimately. The date on that paperwork, September 2024, lines up almost too perfectly with the start of a new filming season if the land had been divided equitably. Any earlier in the process, much of the dramatic tension would have completely evaporated. It seems abundantly clear that the entire Coyote Pass saga was deliberately stretched out to keep tensions high and viewer interest alive for as long as possible. The custody situation reveals even more disturbing patterns when Christine announced she was leaving and moving to Utah. Suddenly Cody became incredibly focused on getting 50-50 custody of Truly. But this wasn't because he genuinely wanted to be a more present, involved father. It was because it looked good legally and might help him avoid paying child support. He wasn't trying to create meaningful connection with his daughter. He was trying to protect his financial interests, plain and simple. Meanwhile, around that same Christmas period, he didn't speak to Savannah for days at a time. No check-ins, no visits. Absolutely nothing. Then he turns around and blames Janelle for the lack of time he spends with their daughter, claiming that if they hadn't separated, he could have split his time between today's with Robyn and today's with Janelle. As if his presence is some kind of precious prize and his daughter's availability doesn't matter, unless it happens to be convenient for his schedule. Here's the brutal reality that everyone needs to understand. Savannah was there, 100% available to spend time with her father, and he consistently chose not to show up. No excuse, no valid reason, just indifference. But when Christine was preparing to move to Utah with Truly, he made a dramatic scene over custody arrangements, not out of genuine concern for his daughter's well-being, but because he needed to maintain control over the situation. He creates conflict instead of connection because that's simply what he does. After all the drama and door-slamming arguments, he shows up at Janelle's place acting cheerful and expecting a warm welcome, as if he hadn't stormed out in anger the last time they spoke. But Janelle wasn't fooled by the performance. She made it crystal clear that she wanted to remain separated, and she didn't buy into the empty charm or fake promises for even a second. What's painfully obvious throughout all of this is that Cody treats his children based entirely on how he feels about their mothers at any given moment. If he's upset with the mom, the child becomes completely invisible to him. His love is conditional, transactional, and genuinely cruel in its application. His behavior towards Savannah proves this point perfectly. She didn't wrong him in any way. She didn't pick sides in adult conflicts. But because he's punishing Janelle for not accepting his terms, Savannah gets pushed aside and forgotten. It's absolutely astonishing how blatantly he neglects his children, while still managing to spin every narrative to make himself appear to be the victim. He cannot comprehend that his own actions and choices are the direct cause of these relationship breakdowns. Instead, he consistently blames everyone else for not tolerating a lopsided arrangement where Robyn gets everything she wants and the others are left with excuses and empty promises. And that blank expression when Janelle directly calls him out for not seeing his daughter over the holidays, that wasn't shock or surprise. That was pure indifference. He didn't forget about Savannah. He simply didn't care enough to make the effort. He doesn't actually parent his children. He performs the role when it suits his purposes and abandons it when it doesn't. The COVID situation reveals the final layer of manipulation that most people completely missed. They claimed all the restrictions and rules were about safety, but it turns out it was really about control from the very beginning. In one episode, Robyn tells her children that Janelle and Christine don't want to spend Thanksgiving with them. She frames it as if Cody had given the other wives a reasonable list of safety rules to follow, so they could all see each other, making it sound like the others simply refused to cooperate with basic precautions. But there's a glaring inconsistency in this narrative that reveals everything. When the adults met at Mary's house and Cody and Robyn presented that infamous list of requirements, Robyn claimed she had already been following those exact rules for 8 full months. If that statement was actually true, why didn't she present it as, "Here's what your father and I have been doing for months to stay safe, and we're simply asking everyone to do the same"? Instead, it was framed as if these were long-standing practices that everyone else had just refused to adopt, which raises serious questions about the actual timeline and motivations involved. Realistically, it's extremely hard to believe that Robyn and Cody had been wiping down every piece of mail, avoiding all stores completely, and maintaining that extreme level of quarantine for 8 continuous months. At most, They likely stayed home more than usual and practiced basic precautions like frequent hand washing and social distancing. All evidence points to these elaborate rules being introduced shortly before the holiday gathering, likely as a precondition Robyn established in hopes of getting the entire family together on her specific terms and conditions. From the way her children responded to the situation, it's highly doubtful they had been living under those strict rules for months either. If they genuinely had been following those protocols, their reaction would have been more along the lines of, "We've done our part for months. Why won't they do theirs?" Instead, their responses suggested they had just been told what to expect and were confused and hurt. When the others declined to participate, the narrative Robyn presented to her children appeared carefully crafted to shift blame and create a sense of rejection and abandonment. She made it seem like Christine and Janelle simply didn't care enough about family unity to make reasonable sacrifices, when the reality was much more complex. In truth, Christine and Janelle had children and grandchildren in other states they wanted to visit during the holidays. Robyn even acknowledges this reality, mentioning that the original 3 wives have older children who have moved away to build their own lives. Yet she still implies that in their polygamous structure, it should be different, that sacrificing time with adult children should be expected and accepted. Meanwhile, she gets to have all her children at home for every single holiday without question or compromise. This entire situation comes across as calculated emotional manipulation rather than genuine concern for anyone's well-being. Rather than helping her children understand the real complexities involved, the distances, the life circumstances, or even just the basic reality of sharing time among many family members, Robyn deliberately leans into a victim narrative that serves her purposes. When one of her sons comments that the others can't follow the rules or won't, there's complete silence. No effort whatsoever to explain the real-world reasons why the others couldn't be there, such as work obligations, school schedules, or simple logistics. Even setting the pandemic aside entirely, it's completely inevitable in a large, geographically spread out family that not everyone will be able to gather in the same place every single year. That reality should have been acknowledged and explained. Instead, Robyn chose to portray the situation as a matter of principle and loyalty, something the others were fundamentally failing at. The praise Mary received from the children for staying also rings hollow when you examine the circumstances. Given her situation, Mary likely didn't have much of a choice in the matter. With her adult child living out of state and no indication they were invited to spend Thanksgiving together, her options were genuinely limited. Janelle and Christine were painted as disloyal or selfish for choosing to visit their other children during the holidays. But this narrative completely ignores the fact that it was Cody who had set firm exclusionary terms for the gathering. He made it crystal clear that certain family members weren't welcome without complete submission to his rules. The so-called concern for safety was selectively applied based on who was willing to submit to their control. By that point in the pandemic, most people and families had adjusted their behaviors and found reasonable ways to gather safely. But Robyn clung to extreme measures and convinced Cody to do the same, fracturing the larger family dynamic in the process. Despite repeatedly claiming they were the ones who had been voted off the island and rejected, Robyn and her children were actually the ones who closed the door on future relationships. After all the conflicts and harsh words, her children expressed no genuine desire to reconnect with the rest of the extended family. Yet Robyn continued portraying them as the rejected and abandoned ones. The truth is, it was never really about COVID safety or health protocols. It was about control, manipulation, and rewriting the narrative to suit Robyn's preferred role as the perennial victim in every situation. While everyone was busy mocking Janelle's farm dream and criticizing her choices, they missed the real story that was unfolding right in front of them. Janelle was the one person who consistently tried to hold this family together. She was the one who believed in their shared principles. She was the one who made genuine efforts to communicate and find solutions. And now, while others are dealing with the consequences of their choices, she's building the peaceful, grounded life she always wanted on her own terms. So the next time someone wants to mock Janelle's farm or question her decisions, maybe they should ask themselves this: who's really winning in this situation? The woman who's creating the life she wants with her family around her, or the people still trapped in cycles of conflict and control? Because when you look at it that way, it becomes pretty clear who's having the last laugh.